Hey guys, welcome back to Let's Talk Live. And this week we're talking Stephen King film adaptations. Actually, Kevin L picked this category, so we can all thank him for it. I don't know if any of you guys are here yet, but if we're just to start off the top, the first Stephen King film adaptation was Carrie, which actually was directed by Brian De Palma. So that was quite a team up. That's a classic film. Young John Travolta. Good afternoon, John and Chad. John Doe Juggalo's here. What's up, John Doe Juggalo? Welcome, welcome. I guess we'll be probably still waiting for more people to show up. But for now, me and you could just talk and we could just talk about Stephen King film adaptations because Stephen King is one of the greatest novelists of all time. He's written some of the greatest films. I don't think he actually wrote screenplays. He only really wrote novels and then they were adapted. He directed only one movie, and that was Maximum Overdrive, which is a fantastic film in its own way. Stephen King himself has said that he doesn't remember making the movie. He was so high on cocaine the whole time. I think he actually got sober after that movie, probably because he considers it such a mess, but yet that whole AC/DC soundtrack, that I love that movie. It's a product of the 80s, but it's still just a ton of fun. But some of my favorite Stephen King movies are the Shining is always going to be number one for me, just because of how good it is, and, how well made it is. Even if Stephen King himself does not like The Shining. Let's see who else is here. Hey, John, buddy, that's from Shamrock Balls. Kevin L, who came up with this topic, he wrote, "Hey, John," and John the Juggler wrote, "I don't do multi packs on Blue too often. One that I do own is Love King of Honor collection." Oh, okay. Yeah, that's pretty cool. See, that's some adaptations that, yeah, I'm not a big fan either of actually getting those bundles as well. I have one for a few Kevin Smith movies that I really just don't like. It's three random movies. It's Clerks, about, was some what was it? And Jane Silent Bob and maybe Clerks 2, but it's one of the worst bundles of just random movies, and I hate having it, but sometimes you have no choice but to get those bundles. But let's see right here. John Doe, it's got Salem's Lot, The Shining, Cat's Eye, and It. Okay, so those are great movies, and all of them, except, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Cat's Eye, but everything else I like in that collection. Favorite Kevin L wrote, favorite performance from a Stephen King movie. Jack Nicholson in The Shining. That is definitely the most iconic performance. I mean, you could say like from Shawshank Redemption, maybe Michael Clark Duncan in The Green Mile. Those are also iconic performances. But Jack Nicholson in The Shining, that's the one. And then we got Rico Gomez in here. Does The Shining scare you? And is it top 10 scary movies of all time? To me, it's not scary at all, but just entertaining. So I don't really get scared of movies, actually. It's very rare that a movie gets under my skin. The last movie to really do it was Hereditary, and that really felt like just shock value because I didn't expect that to happen at all. But The Shining, I've never been scared of it, but I just find that movie to just be so well made. The score is so perfect. It's atmospheric. I mean, I'm in there for for the acting, really. Jack Nicholson puts on a show. Like the ballroom scene is iconic. Just the way, just there's two guys talking at the bar, and was one guy a ghost or not, and just how Jack Nicholson gets wrapped up in it, how he's just losing his mind. That's a perfect performance. But The Shining in general is just a perfect film. Shelley Duvall also does a great job in there. And Kevin L said, "Do you like Pet Cemetery remake?" I actually do like the Pet Cemetery remake, but I've only seen it once. I remember I went to the movies that day. I saw Pet Cemetery and another movie, and I don't even remember what the other movie was. And I thought Pet Cemetery was really good. And I remember coming out of it, not a lot of people were too happy with it. I think the original is still better, but it's not a bad movie by no means. I think Jason Clark kind of for some reason gets a bad rep. He's a pretty good actor. If you guys have never saw Chappaquiddick, he is awesome in Chappaquiddick. But John Doe Jugger wrote that new steelbook for Maximum Overdrive is awesome. It really is. I'm gonna have to grab it at some point because I wanted that that cover alone just screams the 80s. Like, I mean, just think about what the premise of that movie is. And even the book in general of just everyday objects coming to life, machines coming to life. It, it still rings true today in certain ways, but not in that kind of way. And then Kevin L. wrote 1990s It versus 2017. So I think 2017's It is actually the best of the It movies, even over It Chapter 2. But I do have a soft spot for the 1990 It miniseries. I think Tim Curry is iconic in that. It does feel like a TV movie. It feels cheap, there's not as much gore, but it's actually pretty scary. That's the one thing you could say about that original miniseries. And it's faithful to the book, but that also means it's faithful to the book in the ending, and obviously that one scene we don't talk about. And then Rico Gomez wrote, "The Shining 4K is one of the best 4K ever for quality transfers. 110%. That is one of the best I've ever seen. I have no complaints about The Shining 4K. It's gorgeous. Warner Brothers, one of their best releases ever. Forget just anything. It's one of the best 4Ks you can ever get. Least favorite Stephen King movie, Kevin L. wrote. Um, Part of me wants to say Sleepwalkers, but another part of me wants to say the Lawnmower Man, because that movie is awful, but it's very entertaining. But the CGI in that movie that was passing for we're supposed to believe it in the Lawnmower Man is just ridiculous. Shamrock Ball said, "I'd have to say my favorite movie based on a King novel is probably Misery. I also love The Green Mile and Stand By Me. All those are iconic. I agree with you, Shamrock, buddy. Those are all awesome." Um, I just got the Misery 4K a couple months ago and rewatched it, and that movie is it's such a perfect movie. Such two great performances in both Kathy Bates and in James Caan, given probably his last great performance. And I could never imagine somebody else in those roles, but yet both of them were not the top choices. Shamrock Balls also wrote, "Love Nicholson, but don't think much of The Shining. Read the book and much more preferred that." Sam's Lot is also a favorite of mine. Yeah, actually, Shamrock Balls, that's a good question I have for you. I think we might have talked about this. Um, as far as like I see you wrote also about the TV movie. Do you prefer the Shining film, or do you prefer that TV miniseries that they did for the Shining that I think Stephen King either directed, or like he prefers that version? He hates the actual Shining that Stanley Kubrick directed. He despises that movie. He's like it's one of the worst adaptations of his novels ever. And I understand that the TV series is much more faithful to how the novel is, and that's what more people prefer. And I mean, as far as a film goes, I just don't think you can compare them. I think that The Shining is one of the best movies ever. But I get it. If you have a love for that book like Stephen King does, and you want it to be portrayed how the book is portrayed, I get it. The Shining film is nothing like that, and I can see why people and like why Stephen King would be offended. It's just for me, I just think the film is iconic. And Kevin Alvaro, would you like to see a remake of of Misery? That's one that I think you could remake. I don't think you touch it personally, but I can understand that one being remade because it very much is just like a play. Like just there's not many people in it. It takes place for the most part in one area, so you can change out the players and just have them redo the whole thing. I don't know if I would hate it. I don't think it's necessary because it's also got great direction by Rob Reiner. I'd be a little disappointed. Chadwick Boseman, yes, John. James Caan is often overlooked in Misery. He was great. Yeah, James Caan gets overlooked a lot. Like I feel like people go right to two things with him nowadays. They remember him as Sonny from The Godfather, or they remember him as the dad in Elf. But he had a lot of great movies. I don't know if you guys ever saw the movie Thief. He's awesome in that movie. He was popping up. I think it was a Brian's Song, which is one of the greatest TV movies ever. He was around, and then obviously he was in Bottle Rocket also in a little role, kind of like doing the Bill Murray thing before Bill Murray. And then what else would you like to see? Let's see. What else we got? Kevin L. wrote, most underrated Stephen King movie, 1408. I absolutely love that movie. And I don't even really like John Cusack. John Cusack, for some reason, unless it's like Gross Point Blank, or if he's like doing like a small role, he drives me nuts. I don't know what it is. He's just been one of those. We all kind of, I feel like, have that one actor that just kind of gets under our skin. And for me, it's always kind of been him. I don't know why. He's never done anything wrong to upset me, but for some reason, I just always get a little thrown off by his acting. But he is great in 1408. That's the other Stephen King haunted hotel movie. That one's just based on a little novella, though. It's nothing too big that they actually drew out. And I think they did a great job. And that's a great Samuel Jackson performance in that. That one got under my skin the first time I saw it. Shamrock Bros. Sorry, I haven't seen the TV version of The Shining. Yeah, I think that that's the preferred version of by Stephen King, and I think you would actually like that more, Shamrock, because if you prefer the book and have more of a connection to that, I think that might be more up your alley. Thoughts on Maximum Overdrive? Kevin L wrote that. I love that movie. I think that's just like I said, it's just the cocaine 80s just everywhere. You get an AC/DC soundtrack. Is it a smart movie? Is it coherent? You can argue no, but it's a fun movie just because of how stupid it is. But I do still have a lot of fun with that. Shamrock Bros. Road. I know I need to see Thief. Loved him as Sonny. Yeah, I could highly recommend Thief to you, Shamrock Bros. That was Michael Mann's. I think that's his directorial debut. I think he did a TV movie before that, but that was like his first theatrically released movie. It's got a great '80s score on it, a very Sith heavy score. You see a young Jim Belushi in there, and James Caan is just playing a great role in there. It's just about this guy who he's a thief. He'll let you know right off the top, no matter who he is. He's proud of it in a way, but it's just a great little movie. John Doe Juggler wrote, I like James Caan in the early 2000s Las Vegas show. Yeah, that show kind of got forgotten. What's it called? That one was very popular at the time. I remember watching that every week, and then it kind of just faded away. But James Caan was great in that. That was kind of like the James Caan resurgence. He was popping up a little bit around the time of Elf. Like that was kind of like a resurgence of him. I always felt like James Caan, like he aged really fast, and then he stayed 75 years old for about 40 years because he's like sunny and then he's old. And then Rico Gomez wrote, "Don't forget about Khan and Thief." I will never forget about James Caan and Thief. Top five Steven Spielberg 4Ks. That's from Kevin L. Well, The Shining is number one. I'd put Misery at number two. That is a great 4K. Let's see. Doctor Sleep is also a great 4K, so I'd probably put that at number three. Shawshank Redemption is a great 4K. I don't have the Green Mile 4K. I've heard a lot of great things about it, but I actually haven't grabbed that one yet. I don't know why. It's been on sale for like $7, and I could have grabbed it, but that's a failure on my part. Just trying to go through it in my head. We got Needful Things coming out pretty soon. What else do we got? Dead Zone doesn't have a 4K, but that's a classic Steven Spielberg, Stephen King adaptation that I really love. That's one of them. A lot of people, if they ever think that Christopher Walken can't act, I say watch the Dead Zone. That one's a really good one. And plus, it's a David Cronenberg movie, even though it's kind of a toned back David Cronenberg movie. So I think that's four. What's the fifth Stephen King one that I adaptation? I'm trying to think. Oh, It Chapter One. That is a good 4K too, actually. And I'll only give it the edge over It Chapter Two because of quality of film, even though they are very comparable. Telling Freddie say hi everyone, love Thief, Rico, and then we get Kevin Elro. What do you think of Dreamcatcher? I don't know if I'm too familiar. Is there a movie of Dreamcatcher? I don't think I've actually watched that. If there is, so I can't really comment. There's some Stephen King adaptations I haven't seen. Like another one is Dolores Claiborne, I believe was called. Like Kathy Bates came back to doing a Stephen King movie that came out in '95. I've heard that movie is great. I haven't seen that one. There's another one from I haven't seen Silver Bullet. I've heard good things about Silver Bullet. Actually, Rico Gomez told me plenty of things about Silver Bullet. That's one I have to check out. I think that has a 4K, so that's one other one I haven't seen of his movies. And then Rico Gomez wrote, Current Carry 4K is very good. That's another 4K I need to get. Matt, actually, when we, he did the review for that one, and I haven't grabbed that on 4K yet. He said it was a good 4K, and Carrie's a great film. Brian De Palma. That's the first Stephen King movie, if you guys can believe that, was Carrie way back in the 70s. So they really started adapting his movies really, really fast. Pretty much just bringing them to the big screen, and they never really stopped anyway. Like we have little rough patches where we don't hear from him for a little while, then we had that resurgence like back in 2017 when it came around, and then we had so many of them coming to Netflix. Like we had even everyone. Mike Flanagan was adapting his work. That they were kind of, we went a little too far. I don't remember what the movie was with Idris Alba, but that was based on a series of books that they tried to consolidate in the one movie, and I remember that just failed really hard. And that's unfortunate because I know a lot of people love those movies, all those books. I just can't remember the name of them off the top of my head. Shamrock Revolves. Or do you read Stephen King, John? Well, I've only read a couple of his books. I've never read them all. I've read the big ones like It, and I'm going to tell you guys, I did a book report when I was in middle school, or it was high school, it was ninth grade. I did a book report on The Shining, and I took The Shining out of the library, and I just ended up watching the movie 3 times and then looking up a list to like a Spark Notes thing to compare the book to the movie, so I knew the differences. Then I ended up submitting it like that and got 100. So I never actually read The Shining all the way through. I've only read parts of it, but it I had to read because I know there's a big difference between the book and how the film's adapted because there's certain things that just can't be adapted to film, but well, just for certain reasons. But I've read a couple, but not a lot. I'm not the biggest reader. I read every usually if I read it's about movies, if that makes any sense. I know it's a little ridiculous, Shamrock. uh John Doe Juggler wrote his stories made for good movies. Well, actually, I really think that it's surprising. A lot of his short stories end up becoming some of the most like emotional movies, like Stand by Me, Misery, and then obviously Shawshank Redemption became probably his most popular movie. That was like a real crowd pleaser, and that doesn't ever. I remember that's the one that people still don't believe is a Stephen King movie or based on a Stephen King novel because it's not based on a novel; it's based on a short story. But people don't think that Stephen King wrote that because it doesn't fit like the tone. People always just know Stephen King for his horror, which he does. But there's other Stephen King's tropes out there that we all have to know. Like obviously he has the religious overtones that he has in all of his stuff. Usually takes place in Maine, so that's always a big deal with all of his stuff. Bullies, 1950s greasers. Like these are all stuff that usually get adapted to a lot of his books that end up coming to the big screen. I mean, because of Stephen King, who doesn't want to go to Maine? That's a big one. Shamrock Balls wrote this Pet Cemetery remake was horrible. Damn it, Shamrock. I actually kind of like that one. I don't think it's that bad. I mean, is it a phenomenal film? Is it as good as the original Pet Cemetery? No, no, it's not. But I really didn't think it was that bad. I don't think I wasn't like personally offended by it. I actually enjoyed it that day. I'm actually trying to remember what the other movie was I saw that day that I actually. Oh, I remembered what it was, and I'm completely wrong because this movie wasn't as good as was better than Pet Cemetery. I was Shazam. I saw Shazam that same day, but I really enjoyed the actual Pet Cemetery remake. I know that they just switched the gender roles for the for the kids, but I think that Jason Clark was believable and the effects were pretty good. You can't replace Fred Gwynn though. That's the big one. And then Kevin L wrote first King movie you saw in theaters. I know I saw 1408. I'm trying to think if I saw one before that. I think I also saw The Mist in theaters, which I think is 2004. So I'm gonna guess it was probably The Mist because there was that gap between like the mid 90s to like the early 2000s where they weren't really adapting as many King movies that they were before. So it was kind of like a when I was really starting to go to the movies, it was really a dry run as far as we weren't getting as many Stephen King adaptations. We get spoiled nowadays with the amount that come to Netflix, and they were really adapting them a lot in the 80s. I mean, everybody, John Carpenter's Christine, like they were tackling Stephen King novels all the time in the 80s. One of the best books, in my opinion, is The Girl Who Loves Tom Gordon. I long for a film adaptation. That's one I should probably read then. I mean, I know I haven't read that one, but if that's one of your favorites, I should definitely check that out. And I'm surprised that there are so many. It blows my mind about how much he can write. Stephen King, the amount of books he puts out, the fact that he actually still contributes to all of these films. It feels like he just never stops working. I mean, and plus he had his drug struggles in the 80s, and then came out of that. But it's just crazy to me that this guy is just never not writing. It seems like he has the amount of movies that have been made just from his books is incredible. Short stories. He appears in like movies like Creep Show 2. Like he does it all. Shamrock Balls wrote Misery wasn't a short story. He wrote it as his. Oh, you're right. As his persuade him, but it was blown so he published it in his own name. Gotcha. I did. You know what? I feel like I just listened to a podcast about Misery and I remember reading that, but I always thought it was based on a short story. So that's my mistake. I've never read it. That's one I got to read, but yeah, that would make sense. A book about a writer himself, a writer who like longs to be alone and just write his books and then dealing with obsessed fans. Like that definitely sounds like something he would definitely be into. Thoughts on the Langoliers? I haven't seen that in a long time to even really give an honest opinion on it. I know I've seen it, but I don't know if I've seen it in a long time. Right? Let me make sure that's even a freaking thing, or if I'm just thinking of something else, because that could be. I could be wrong on that. The Langoliers. Oh, I was one. That was a show, sci-fi, one season. So I have seen that. I think I had a DVD of that, or my mom had a DVD of that. One of them that I remember watching. because they had my parents definitely, well, my mom and my stepdad definitely liked Stephen King because they would always watch like The Stand and all that stuff, and they're the ones who showed me it. So they like Stephen King. Shamrock Balls wrote the remake had a lot of issues from changing the gender roles and the ending. Plus, I hate that they portrayed the sister as the monster when she was disabled. I also saw the remake as an opportunity to have the neighbor's wife in it. It explains so much about her death and why he helped Lewis. Well, yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I mean, I understand. I just think that there was definitely more opportunities. It did feel like a very much a straightforward kind of just remake, just swap out some things. And I understand making the sister a monster. It was definitely scary in the theater when I saw it. I thought that that was well done, but I get how it kind of betrays the book and the movie, the original movie itself, when people might have thought of the original movie. But I just I didn't think it was that awful. I kind of just I enjoyed it for what it was. You know, I always really enjoyed the first Pet Cemetery, the original one. That one feels very much like the 80s and an 80s horror film. And you know, Fred Gwynn is just really scary himself in it, even though it's unintentional. But that's like a late Fred Gwynn role, and he was great in it. And you know, that one still holds up pretty well, in my opinion. Do you think Stephen King was a good actor? Kevin L said. No, I don't think Stephen King was a good actor at all. I appreciate him trying. I always appreciate that when they do that. I thought it was pretty damn funny that, you know, especially he would make those facial expressions in Creepshow 2. And it was either Creepshow 1 or Creepshow 2 where his son appears and he had to act with somebody, and his son is supposed to get like take a fake slap. And Stephen King went up, whoever the actor was, and was like, you know, you're not gonna hit my son, right? And he's like, no. So now you got to put all this pressure on him. I can't remember who the actor was, but I always thought that story. Or apparently, Stephen King was just screwing around with him anyway. You know, he knew his son was able to do the job, but just watching Stephen King act was it was kind of atrocious. I didn't think he was good or believable. It was like watching Tarantino act. It's like, hey, leave it to the professionals. That's how I always kind of felt about him. But I appreciate him doing it. I definitely appreciate it. And Kevin, are you getting the Creepshow 4K? 100%. I already have that one pre-ordered for a day one release. I love Creepshow. I think I was thinking about this recently because you know we get a lot of anthology horror films like Creepshow, Creepshow 2, Body Bags, and you know very rarely you get like a regular dramatic as far as you know anthology films. Really, the first one that pops to mind is Wes Anderson's The French Dispatch. So really, Creepshow might be the greatest anthology film we've ever gotten, at least in my opinion, because all the segments are pretty good. There's not one I think that's a miss in the batch. Even Crib Show 2 is pretty good. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. Uh let's see who's next. John Doe Juggler wrote, I just wish they do the whole Dark Tower series of books into film. With the movie, they just barely scraped the story. Yeah, that's the one I was trying to think of. That was the Dark Tower ones. That's the ones that people love all the films. They tried to cram it into one package as far as like really what was it? I don't even know if it was a 2 hour movie, and they tried to cram the series of books that people absolutely adore. And it just didn't work. Like that never works. Either making a mini series, which we've seen them make so many miniseries out of Stephen King novels. So why wouldn't you do that with this? Why did you feel like you had to put it in one book, or why didn't you just separate the films? Like if you had that, maybe they had no faith in it at all. And they just wanted to get some money. Maybe it's a rights thing where you had to put out a movie in a certain amount of time, but it just makes absolutely no sense to me why you would put out a low quality product like that. 808 Physical Media says, hey, John, are you going to review Avatar 4K and Avatar 2 4K? Well, I reached out to Disney to do it, and they never like reached back out to me to send me the 4Ks. And right now, that full price, they're a little bit expensive. And I'll be lagging behind, like, you know, like Jeff already has his video out. So I actually decided I'm going to do like other 4Ks. Like I'm going to review The Firm and Vanilla Sky on 4K this week. I also got Skinamarink on Blu-ray. So I'll be doing that. I will get to eventually the Avatar 4Ks probably when they drop in price, because money's a little tight right now, guys. And you know, I have to make some like cuts. So I can't really swing $33 on each for the avatars. And you know, I know you would watch my review 808, but I can't get everyone to watch them. So, you know, if the bigger channels out there right now do it first, unfortunately, it's like doesn't seem like feasible sometimes. But that's why I always do like the smaller ones that like a lot of the channels might not ever do. Like I'd be surprised if anyone does Vanilla Sky this week, because I'm really excited for that too. I love Tom Cruise, so that and The Firm, what I'm really looking forward to. What's up, Lorenzo Harris, man of God? Going against the grain here, but I actually think It Chapter 1 and 2 are far superior than the original. I also like Skarsgård's performance of Pennywise better than Curry. Skarsgård is awesome, Lorenzo, as far as like his performance. I also agree. His performance is better than Tim Curry. I just get nostalgic for Tim Curry. And I think it chapter one, if it chapter two just it stuck the landing, but they can never stick the landing to it. That's one of the hardest ones. And I think even I was listening to a podcast about this recently that apparently it's just really hard, no matter who it is, to stick that landing for it chapter two, just because it's even written kind of silly. So that one becomes like an issue. But I still like it chapter two, and it's that one I don't think is superior than the entire miniseries of it chapter one. I mean, of it from 1990, but I still think that it's great. I really think it chapter two, so as far as a Stephen King adaptation, it's probably top five. It's really that good. Again, it's just the second part. The adults, they just don't act as good, and then the CGI of they try to de-age the kids to make them kind of shoehorn in like these moments that weren't in chapter one. Like I think that was just because the studio knew that everyone got attached to the kids in it chapter one, so they kind of put them into the movie in it chapter two, and it just felt out of place to try and tell it non-linearly. And I just for it chapter two, I felt like there was just a lot left on the table to make it a better film, but it's still a good film. And it's just like watching the second part of the it miniseries. It's just hard to get that second part right, which I understand. What's your thoughts on it chapter two? That's a show. Just well, yeah, I guess I could continue a little bit of my thoughts on it chapter two because it just there was just so much there that could have been great. And I feel like all of our expectations were for it to be great because it starts out so well, like with that kid getting kidnapped into the sewer, and how we're now in the present day. And then the cast was perfectly cast, like Jessica Chastain. You get everybody in there who I think did a good job in their roles. A lot of people that we kind of would expect to be the older versions of these kids. I think they did a good job casting the movie. The guy from The Wire, I always love seeing pop up. He was Eddie, I think. But he everybody does a good enough job. I just felt like there could have been more. I do prefer the ending to It Chapter Two over those big gigantic prop spider from the It 1990 miniseries. 110%. I think it's a big jump in quality from that, but it's still one day they're going to adapt it, and we're going to adapt it right in the second part. But still, Bill Skarsgård is amazing in It Chapter Two. Kevin L said best sex scene in a Stephen King movie. Wow. I have to go through my mind and think of a sex scene actually, because I don't log those that well. What movies had a sex scene even in it? If you guys want to help me out, pick one out for me. I have nothing. Lorenzo Harris, man of God, says, I forgot to say good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon. Don't worry about that. John Doe Juggalo wrote good afternoon to him. Are you a fan of the Children of the Corn franchise? Kevin L said. I am actually a fan of the Children of the Corn franchise, even though I haven't watched the remake that came out this year. I feel like a lot of people kind of were talking about that, how they didn't like Firestarter from last year, that remake, over the one from Drew Barrymore. Even the Firestarter, I actually like the remake that came out last year. I know that it wasn't like loved, and actually a lot of people put it on their worst films of the year list. I think they were being a little too mean about that. I get it. I mean, Zac Efron, I thought he turned out a pretty good performance. Now he's starting to play dads because he's getting older. That's starting to make me feel like I'm getting older. So that hurts a little bit. But I thought that Firestarter was pretty good. And I thought, Children of Corn, I'm not, when I get to the remake, I'm sure that, it won't be as bad as it's being hyped up to be. But the original one from 1984 with Linda Hamilton is great. I mean, that one is like pretty scary. It's kind of like its own like twist on like Lord of the Flies and that whole deal. But the whole series in general is pretty decent. I think there's 4 films in the original run, and they kind of become lower in quality as far as visuals and the filmmaking goes, but they're still fun to watch because that's kind of one thing that they were doing in the 80s and early 90s. Like even like because the Amityville Horror, look how many sequels there are for that. They would just release like kind of like direct to video versions, and like for the most part in the horror genre they're still entertaining, and Children of the Corn I think capitalized on that market in my opinion. John Doe Juggler wrote, I don't hear people say about Dreamcatcher very often. I haven't seen it in years, but I remember loving it. Yeah, I watched Dreamcatcher a couple years ago, and I thought it was pretty good. That's one of those Stephen King ones that doesn't get talked about a lot. I think that and, Sleepwalkers, Silver Bullet, Cujo, like sometimes will come up every once in a while, which I always find funny, is because Cujo is a great it's not a Great Dane, but whatever that dog is, I had one of those dogs, and it was just nothing like that. She was like the sweetest, the dumbest dog I ever had in my life, Saint Bernard. But they are not angry animals as far as dogs go. They are just not that kind of dog. So I always find it funny because I think they just kind of thought like, oh, it's a big dog because they do. They're big monsters, but they're big idiots. That's what the thing about Saint Bernards. They're goofy. Like they're just a big goofy dog who's always rolling around in the mud. Saint Bernard. Thanks, Shamrock. Yeah, I don't know why I couldn't remember Saint Bernard. Yeah, her name was Maggie, and they don't live very long. She passed away from natural causes at like 6 years old, just because of how big and heavy they are. It's sad. It's sad, but I don't imagine them doing that. What they ended up doing in Cujo. They're just not that kind of dog. And John Doe Juggalo wrote, "I love Cujo. One of my early Blu-ray pickups for my collection. I believe we're getting a 4K of that. I remember announcing that on one episode of Let's Talk Physical Media. I think that's coming this year on 4K. That was kind of coming around the time. I think that might actually come out the same year as Christine, and maybe Christine just overshadowed Cujo so much because Christine is one of my personal favorites as well. Because again, it's a John Carpenter film. That's a great one. Shamrock Bells wrote, "Read the book. It annoyed me. It annoyed me because that mom was an idiot and the film was meh." I mean, yeah, that's another one. Like you kind of got to look through like the plot where the mom not the brightest in her decision making for sure. Uh, but I mean, I enjoy the movie. I'm trying to think what would be like my favorite ones. Like I think one of the more underrated ones. Again, I'll say it is the Dead Zone, directed by David Cronenberg. I love that movie. I think that movie's fascinating, just in the premise of it, of a guy who kind of just develops like he's able to, he's in a coma for so long, and now he kind of develops this new sense where he could like almost like a sixth sense. He can see the future and what's going to happen, and the things he sees are all dark. Like he can see deaths, and a lot of people kind of don't. With that kind of movie like that, especially like when we're talking about a president who becomes corrupt, played great by Martin Sheen, and what Christopher Walken's willing to do to prevent the future. Is he willing to risk his own life? I think that the Dead Zone is definitely a hugely underrated one. Um, and we haven't talked about The Mist yet, I think, but that one has one of the world's craziest endings, one of the biggest twist endings in film history. I never expected that ending, and I know that's not the original ending. I don't think that's the ending in the book, but I know in the remake it's not done the same way. So there's a bunch of different ways that they can go with that. But I think The Mist from 2004, that's a fantastic one too that doesn't get talked about. Oh, I love The Mist, Shamrock Balls, right? Yeah, that's a great one. That one, I love the tone of that movie. Like even before the ending, I think that movie was just very well made. And that was one of the only ones that we really kind of got around that time. Like that's around the time when they weren't adapting Stephen King, films as much. It wasn't just coming around that much. It wasn't really till we got to it, and then we got a bunch of stuff after that. But it was really the 80s through like the mid 90s, I would say they were just adapting all the time. But then the Rob Reiner ones, like Stand By Me is one of the best ones. Did you like Thinner? I do like Thinner. That's another one of those like that I enjoy. Like like there's the ones that like have like the low quality look to them. Like the Lawnmower Man, or people would say probably Needful Things. Needful Things is getting that 4K release this year. I'm really excited about, and that's like such a simple premise, a silly premise in a way, but I still think that it plays really well. And actually, they made a Rick and Morty episode out of that, basically, with like the devil is he has a store and he's just selling things, and they're all got his little evil twist on it. I really think that Needful Things is one of those that really needs a second coming. The Lawnmower Man, I don't know if there's any saving that, but I think that the CGI in that is just so funny that it's actually worth watching just for how ridiculous it was made. But I guess we got to talk about Jonathan Demme's The Shawshank Redemption at some point, because that's probably his most successful adaptation. He stars Tim Robbins, Morgan Freeman, these friends. Obviously we don't know 110% sure if Tim Robbins killed his wife or not, but that movie is a masterpiece, nominated for Best Picture in 1994. Pulp Fiction and Forrest Gump were nominated as well. The Lion King, Quiz Show, and a lot of people have argued that The Shawshank Redemption should have won that year over Forrest Gump. And Shawshank Redemption is a great feel good movie. It's like TNT's favorite movie ever. I remember watching that a million times growing up on TV before I ever even got a Blu-ray. So that's another one. MD wrote Tommy Knockers. Kate Winslet wrote, "Don't quit your J job." Thanks, Kate. Kate's a sweet one. She always likes to pop in here and throw some insults out every now and then when she wants to. Uh, Shawshank was directed by Frank Darabont, wasn't it? Yes, it was. What I say, Jonathan Demme, the guy who directed Philadelphia and what am I just throwing a blank on? Silence of the Lambs. Why did I meant Frank Darabont? I don't know why. Frank Darabont's debut film. He also directed The Green Mile. I don't know why I didn't think of that. And you, John Doe Juggler. Honestly, there are so many of his novels made into film. I forgot which ones are those sometimes. Yeah, he has had so much adapted. It's actually incredible. Shamrock Balls. I think Shawshank is overrated. I don't know if it's over. It's not the greatest film that people will have you believe. I think it's actually the number one ranked film on IMDb right now. So it's still got that popularity, and that's just because it was watched so much in the '90s. But it's a very well made movie. The story, it's heartwarming. It has a great ending that I also just absolutely love. But it's one of those films that has stood the test of time, and it's got great set design too. That's another thing. That prison has never looked better. Even all the side actors that pop up in there are all phenomenal. It's just a very well made movie. 808 Physical Media said, "Are you a big steelbook collector, and how many are in your collection?" I actually have a lot in my collection. I'm not like somebody who goes out of their way to get a steelbook. If the steelbook looks nice, I'll get it, but I don't think it's my favorite item. Like, I don't go out of my way to get a steelbook. I'll get a steelbook if I feel like it looks good, but if I think the slipcover version is nice enough, that I'll grab. But a steelbook really has to catch my eye for me to really go out of my way to get it. I really love getting these new Lionsgate steelbooks actually that they've been coming out with. Those are really phenomenal. Those are the ones that, yeah, with the slip cover on it. They usually have some kind of something to do with the film. So, like with Terminator 2, it's Arnold. Then when you peel it up, it's the exoskeleton. With Reservoir Dogs, when you peel it up, the ear comes off out of that iconic scene. So it's really just there for the collector, and I absolutely just love what they do with their steel books. The Running Man has basically a regular slipcover over their steel book. That's a phenomenal steel book. I hope they start doing that more, because that's the ideal version of a steel book, because you get the slipcover over the steel book instead of over just the regular packaging. If they can do that all the time, I will be extremely happy with that. I know we won't get that. I know that was kind of like a special deal that they did with the Running Man, but those are ideal slipcover steelbook combinations. Those are the best. But like Insidious had a nice steelbook, but I didn't think it was the best steelbook that I had ever seen. Like, so for that, if there was a regular slipcover version for me to choose from, I would have actually probably gone with the slipcover over the steelbook, but I didn't have the option, so I just ended up going with the steelbook, and I appreciate it. It came out really nice. Uh, Shamrock Balls wrote, "I have an amazing steelbook of Salem's Lot." Isn't there a remake of Salem's Lot coming out this year at some point that I heard about? Because I got to rewatch the original before that coming up. Before that comes, which version of Way of the Water are you getting? And what's it called? And 808 Physical Media asks, "Do you believe in steelbook protectors?" Well, I don't personally get them because I think I've said this before that it kind of drives me nuts. Like that, I'll get like really bad OCD with like protectors and stuff. I won't even really like to put like the screen protectors on my phone because those start to get like fingerprints and everything. I like to like kind of go over my steel books and just anyway regular cases and try and get the fingerprints off as much as I possibly can and dust them, but I don't put protectors on them. But I do think that they're a good idea for protection because steel books in general, especially in shipment, man, they get scratched up a lot of the time, which frustrates me. They like my Beetlejuice 4K steelbook, it has a dent in it. That one really gets under my skin. And then actually the Insidious steelbook came with a scratch on it. It's a little bit annoying, and I obviously the protectors would definitely do something about that. And Kevin, I'm actually not grabbing it right away as far as Avatar goes. I'm gonna get it though eventually and review it, but just not this week, just because you know I had to make some cuts as far as money goes, so I had to like try to choose to. I can only really get one or two things, and this week I went with the Furman Vanilla Sky and Skittermarink, and because those are like $33 for the 4Ks of Avatar, but I will review them eventually, I promise. Shamrock Road. Yeah, I heard they have a remake of Salem's Lot, but it seems to be delayed. I would not hold my hopes up for it. LOL. Well, yeah, everything's getting delayed now, especially with the writer's strike. It's going to start taking an effect on TV shows going forward pretty soon. But as far as for movies go, a lot of stuff are working without it. They don't have to worry about it as long as the script was written. But then we kind of can end up with a Quantum of Solace situation where the writers aren't on set to help make adjustments. And then Quantum of Solace is considered one of the worst Bond films because of the 2007 writer strike. And a lot of those movies at that time, for like 2 years, they kind of had just poor writing in general. And it's just because yes, they're working off already pre-written scripts, but they're not able to adjust on set. So I feel like that definitely plays a part in like areas like that. So I don't know if that's what's affecting Salem's Lot or if like they just felt like the quality wasn't going to be good, but that was a big one. 808 Physical Media wrote Martin Scorsese or Ridley Scott. I'm going to go Martin Scorsese. So I love Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott has made at least three all-time classics, films that everybody has to see in Alien, Blade Runner, and in my opinion, Thelma and Louise. And he's also made Gladiator, which I don't know how many people love that. A very underrated movie in Matchstick Men. Um, he still has movies coming out like The Last Duel. Nobody saw The Last Duel, but he directed that amazingly. He also directed House of Gucci the very same year, which is decent enough. It's not the greatest of movies that I've ever seen. And Jared Leto is doing a Luigi impersonation in House of Gucci, and nobody stopped him. But I mean, Ridley Scott is a fantastic director, but if you're going to compare him to Martin Scorsese rarely misses, and he puts out a movie every few years. He's still doing it at his age. He still puts out really high quality film. Like, look at the reviews coming out about, Killers of the Flower Moon. People are talking about it. People are excited about it. The early reviews say it's phenomenal. Obviously, there's people getting wrapped up in the film festival stuff, but we had the same thing with The Irishman. The Irishman, other than Robert De Niro kicking somebody, was a pretty damn good movie, in my opinion. I absolutely love The Irishman. I mean, this guy's directed Goodfellas, which is one of the greatest films ever made. He's directed Casino, Cape Fear. Like, you could just go on and on. Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, After Hours, like The Color of Money. Like, no matter what it is, if he's a director for hire for a movie or just a movie that he like has had his heart in for his whole life, Wolf of Wall Street, Hugo. I mean, the guy is just phenomenal. I cannot ever pick against Martin Scorsese. It's very rare. He for a long time he was my favorite director, but I just feel like Tarantino has no misses, and it's the only reason I put Tarantino at number one for me personally. Uh, and then Kevin L wrote, "Are you getting Evil Dead Rise on 4K?" I will probably get that eventually on 4K. I don't know if that'll be a day one buy because I did just watch that in theaters a couple months ago when it was first released. So it's kind of really still very fresh in my mind as far as do I need to watch it again. And I'm sure that the quality of the disc will be pretty decent. It's a Warner Brothers new release. So I'm sure it'll be a pretty high quality looking. And from what I remember in the theater, it was a very good looking movie. So I'm excited at least for it to come to 4K. But if it's going to be $30, you could watch it on HBO right now, or Max if you have it. So I don't need to rush out and grab the 4K. Shamrock Balls wrote, "I watched Gladiator the other night. Great film. Did you hear they're making a Gladiator 2? But here's the question: Ridley Scott or Tony Scott?" Ooh, see. I have defended my entire life by saying Tony Scott is overall a better director than Ridley Scott. Now, let me paraphrase this by saying that Ridley Scott has probably had much higher highs than Tony Scott. I mean, nobody is going to argue that Blade Runner and Alien are better than any Tony Scott film. But Ridley Scott has also whiffed on a bunch of films, whereas Tony Scott has remained consistent up until his death. I feel like all of his movies are at least decent to some of my personal favorite movies. Yes, I love 80s movies, and this guy made Top Gun, Beverly Hills Cop 2, which are two classics from the 80s, and then movies that feel like 1980s, like Don Simpson, Jerry Bruckheimer movies, like Days of Thunder. Tony Scott directed that, The Last Boy Scout, The Fan. I mean, I love these movies. And then in the 2000s, you get movies like Man on Fire and Unstoppable, True Romance. Like, True Romance is a Tarantino script with a Quentin Tarantino script with Tony Scott's direction. I mean, that's a match made in heaven, in my opinion, because Tony Scott's movies, they always have this like beautiful look to them, smoke-filled rooms. That might be like a Jerry Bruckheimer, Don Simpson kind of look. Again, the cocaine 80s, but I love that look. And Tony Scott's movies, for me, He very rarely misses, and he's just that good of a director. And he was one of our greats, for my choice, and I feel like probably for your choice too, Shamrock. I think you'll agree that Tony Scott overall at least had the most entertaining of the brothers films. Ridley Scott he had just phenomenal set design and art design and knew how to get a lot out of his actors, whereas Tony Scott kind of like was making some entertaining movies. And as far as Gladiator 2 goes, I am excited about Gladiator 2. Gladiator is a great film. That has a great score. Nobody ever talks about the score to Gladiator. And obviously, we get a Russell Crowe performance. Russell Crowe is not in shape to do that role anymore. Do you double dip for your favorite physical media? Says 808 Physical Media. Uh yes, I do double dip if it's a favorite of mine, but that's it. I won't really ever like double dip just because, like, say something has a steel book and then the standard edition comes out. Like even Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones is one of my. Oh, just real quick before I finish that. John the Juggler wrote, "Sorry, John, I'm gonna have to go bounce early this week going to see Transformers with my dad." John, don't worry about that, John Doe Juggle. Enjoy that with your dad. I hope you guys have a great time and enjoy the movie. I didn't personally love it, but I think you will, especially if you love Transformers. And I hope you guys have a great time watching it. Definitely enjoy it. And thanks for stopping in here, buddy. I appreciate it. So as far as double dipping again, yeah. So like Terminator 2, that 4K is considered one of the worst 4Ks ever, and it's really bad. But I own two copies because I had to have the Lionsgate Steelbook with the slipcover, and I had to have the standard edition to see how bad it was for myself. And then I still will just go back and watch my other edition, the Skynet edition. Then I own it on. I have the Extreme DVD. So for movies like that, absolutely, I'll double dip. Batman 89, then of course I have no problem doing it. If they come out a collector's edition, I want it, at least for my favorites. But standard stuff, if it's just for review, no, I won't double dip because I need to see some quality change in the disc for me to really like try it out again. If it's the same disc, unless it's a favorite, then I won't ever do it. And Kevin Elrow, what happened to Panic Room on 4K? So that's a really funny one, is because I remember last year when I did the David Fincher reviews on the channel here, I ranked them all, but I started doing my rewatch last year because I had heard that Panic Room was coming to 4K. And they announced it, and this seems to happen a lot. Like I know this year they've announced, like I said, Cujo and Kindergarten Cop on 4K, and we haven't gotten them released yet, but there's official announcements out there that they're working on the scan. I just saw Jeff from Films at Home said that they're working on a scan of 7 now, like officially. This is coming from David Fincher's mouth, but we've heard this plenty of times before. Like James Cameron films, oh, that's done. It's done. It just needs to be put out. He's going to be doing it in March. He's going to be doing it in May, and then we never hear from them again. So that's always becomes a very disappointing thing when that happens, and I don't know why. I don't understand what happened. David Fincher still has one movie on 4K to this very moment, and that is just The Social Network. And then you can only get that if you buy the Columbia Classics section Part 2. That's it. You can't even buy it solo. And then 808 Physical Media wrote, True Romance is Tony Scott's best movie because of Quentin Tarantino's writing. So that's either my one or two. My heart says I have to pick Days of Thunder just because I absolutely love that movie, but I know that's the nostalgia talking. I know True Romance is definitely his best made film by far. It's not even close. I get that, but I love them all. I'm just a big fan of him. Shamrock Balls wrote, It's a tough one, John. I love Top Gun, but it's very cheesy. Beverly Hills Cop 2 isn't a patch on the original, and True Romance I wasn't fussed on, but I haven't seen his other movies. Whereas I love Alien, it's in my top 10 movies of all time. I love Gladiator, but I don't like Blade Runner at all. LOL. Yeah, I understand the Blade Runner thing. I recommend this. No one has to do this, but I didn't love Blade Runner the first time I saw it either. I felt like I was sold a lemon. They told me that this is like a sci-fi action movie, and I thought that's what I was going into, something along the lines as far as pacing goes, like the Terminator. And I even thought like Alien in a sense, but what I got was this slow, methodical noir film. And once you get used to that, once you know that's what it is, after a couple watches, I think you might fall in love with it because the score is one of the best scores of all time. The set design is one of the best sets ever built in the history. It's one of Harrison Ford's best performances. I know people were disappointed, especially back in 1982, that this is the guy who plays Han Solo in Indiana Jones, and now he's kind of playing this like almost unlikable character in a way, especially the way he treats Sean Young's character. But in a sense, it does kind of feel very special, something that really like harbored back to the old sci-fi movies that we hadn't been getting at the time, especially when the world of like that what Star Wars created. But I truly love that. But Alien, yeah, it's a toss up between Alien and Blade Runner as his best film, and Gladiator is great as well. Now, True Romance, if you don't love True Romance, does feel very much like a Tarantino movie. It's like Tarantino's engine, and you put it in Tony Scott's car because it's all shined up real nice, but it still sounds like because of the snappy dialogue and how people are talking, it still feels like a special kind of movie, something that's a little bit more enhanced. Again, great Gary Oldman performance in a very little role. Samuel L. Jackson pops up in a very small role, and he does a great job in there. This is a couple years. Actually, this is the year before he would play Jules in Pulp Fiction, so he was definitely floating around then. And that's just a great movie, in my opinion. I get why people don't love that. That's another one where it's like extreme violence, but it's just got this look to it that I just absolutely love. And that's again another great score. It's just another small Brad Pitt performance in there as well as Floyd. So that's a great one. What's your favorite horror movie this year? Says 808 Physical Media. So far this year, horror. I haven't seen Skinamarink yet. I have the Blu-ray in the other room. I've heard good things, but I've also heard that I might hate that movie because it's an experimental horror movie. But and I haven't watched Bo's Afraid yet. And so far this year, as far as horror, I think I've been a little bit disappointed. I haven't. I think it's Evil Dead Rise though. Evil Dead Rise would probably be the best I've seen. Like, it still feels like an Evil Dead movie. I don't think I gave it the most positive review because I kind of had it hyped up to me to be like this great new Evil Dead movie. It was going to put a new twist on it. It really just kind of felt like more of the same, except we didn't have Bruce Campbell in it. Everyone did a good job. It's still a good movie. That they have a scene in there with an eye. I won't spoil it. That definitely made me cringe because anytime something's going in someone's eye, I have a hard time handling it. But other than that, it's still a very good movie. It wasn't a horror changing film like everyone kind of made it out to be. And then Scream 6 was also really good this year. That felt like another one that kind of continued, not didn't really break new ground, but still screams that one franchise, just like Evil Dead, that very rarely misses, so you don't have to worry about like the quality being too bad. It's just that in comparison to like other years, maybe as the year goes on, because we're getting the new Exorcist remake later this year, we'll get some more high quality horror pictures. But as far as so far, I feel like it's Evil Dead Rise. I think I'm gonna say pick it number one. Shamrock Brawls wrote, the problem with True Romance is I didn't like any of the characters. Alien I love more and more the older I get. Yeah, as far as that goes, I have to agree with, one thing you realize with Alien as you get older is that these guys are just regular working people, like men and women. They're both regular working Joes, and they're there just to do a job. And like they just got caught up in the wrong situation, and big business has to win out in the end, and that's what they're trying to do. And that's the whole reason that they're, you know, in this situation. It could have been completely avoided if we just did protocol. And you do care about every character in that movie. Again, Yapia Koto, everyone does such a good job making you care about these just regular working class stiffs that got dealt a really bad hand, and I can relate to that. So Alien is one of my favorites as well. I do understand though, like why in comparison to movies like True Romance, they're very different movies. If you can't get behind any of the characters, but I do get behind Alabama and Clarence. I do care about them. I think they're just two lost souls that found each other. She was a prostitute, and he was just this guy. He's a lonely man working at a comic book shop. He doesn't have nothing happens for him. His boss actually paid for a hooker for him to get laid, just because he never had before, and or he had, and it was like a pity kind of thing. But it's like, oh, he's just so lonely, and then they end up finding each other in this weird circumstances, and then it spirals out of control there. But Clarence has so much confidence in himself. Back to King. Which movie would you like to see remade? Well, they pretty much remade every single Stephen King movie. So this is going to sound weird, but so we know that Stand By Me takes place in the 1950s. Now, I know we've dragged it, kicked it, and just beat the hell out of like remaking movies from the 1980s, but or at least having movies take place in the 1980s and just going with the whole Stranger Things thing. But I would actually like to see a Stand By Me that does take place in the 1980s. You can argue that that's already been done with Stranger Things, but I think I would actually really love to see that. And I think that would be the one that I would want to probably see get remade is Stand By Me. The Lawnmower Man. I would like to see a remake of that because maybe we can modernize it a little bit because that is still a pretty kick-ass story. Um, maybe Christine, like because this isn't like something where I feel like you can't remake these movies because they're adaptations already. So it's fair to go back and remake them with modern technology. So Christine would be really cool, even though I think Christine is a classic and still holds up to this day. Uh, she wasn't a prostitute. She was a call girl, but only for 4 days. Well, is there a difference between a prostitute and a call girl? Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't a call girl a prostitute? Because Gary Oldman, whoop, I hit my mic. Because Gary Oldman was her pimp. So and yeah, I get it. She's new to the game. She doesn't really know what she's doing, but still, she's out there. She's a working girl, Alabama. I just always thought that call girl just meant prostitute or as a fan. I always, instead of calling a girl a whore or something like that, or a man, whatever, that's their job, I say lady of the night. I think that's what they're doing. They're out there working. I'd do it too, but no one would be paying. 808 Physical Media said, "Are you looking forward to the Criterion sale next month?" I absolutely am. I have stuff that I've been wanting to buy that I've had to wait. I did kind of buy some stuff last month. Like I bought La Bella La Bête, Beauty and the Beast from 1946 and the Red Shoes when they were having that 30% off sale, just because I really wanted to watch both of those, even though I haven't found the time yet to watch La Bella La Bête. So I'll eventually, because I do want to see that film. I love Beauty and the Beast. I even like the remake that came out from Disney a few years ago. I thought that was really good. So I'm pretty excited about that. Shabbar Bros. I'm just quoting the movie. John Clarence calls her a prostitute and she corrects and calls her a cobra. Or was it an escort? I think it might have been escort, but I can't remember the line off the top of my head. But I know he was. That's when they're sitting on the sign, right? He's insulting her, kind of. And, she's crying. She's like, oh, she's new to it. You gotta, Clarence to go in there with it took balls to go stand up to Gary Oldman and trying then to take his coke and poor Dennis Hopper, man. He was trying to be a good dad, and look what happens to him. He ends up having a conversation with Christopher Walken, and it doesn't work out for the best of him, unfortunately. Dennis Hopper is great in that movie. Dennis Hopper had another resurgence in the early 90s, too. I don't know if that's when he, sobered up or not, but, he was popping up a lot in the early 90s from then through Speed in, 94. He was definitely having a resurgence in his career. So that is true. And let's see what's next. What happened to your favorite buddy, Matt? Matt just didn't want to do this 808. He couldn't really handle the work. It's hard running a YouTube channel. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. It's very difficult and it doesn't pay very well, especially initially. So right now, even now that it's just me, the finances are not the greatest. That's why I was saying about Avatar and Avatar 2. And you got to really build up an audience until you can eventually start a Patreon and then make a real career out of it. So before that, it's tough. We both have full-time jobs. I work, Sunday through Thursday every week, and then I try and see movies to review, and then I got to review, edit, social media posts. It got to be too much for him. I get it, and he wasn't enjoying it. I at least enjoy talking about movies. For him, it became a chore, and for me, it's not a chore. I just love talking movies. I look forward to doing this every Saturday just because I like to talk to you guys about movies. What I say, I like to talk to you guys in the comment section about movies. I'm not lying. I really just enjoy where I live, and even with my family. It's rare. Sports are the more popular thing, and even TV. As far as film and even talking deep film, it's just not a popular thing out here and it's very rare. Matt was the closest I got to actually having somebody, and you see, we have very different movie taste, so it's just something for me that I like to dive deep into. What you guys you guys will show me movies that even I haven't seen, and I try and do the same, and I really appreciate that. Shamrock Balls Road. Do you think Goldman was doing a Samuel L. Jackson impression? Well, he was definitely doing a racist impression, that's for sure, because I guess the joke is he was a white guy acting black, but my God, I'm surprised nobody hit him on set for that. But I guess that's acting for you. And Shamrock Bros. That scene with Hopper walking James Gandolfini was brilliant, though. Yeah, that's probably the best scene in the movie. And then James Gandolfini, I believe the scene with him and Alabama in the bathroom where he just beats the ever loving hell out of her is what got him the job on The Sopranos. I know it's 6 years before because they started filming in 1999, and I know he's in movies in between that, playing different roles. But I just feel like that's scary guy because James Gandolfini, by all accounts, was a really nice guy in real life. And then once he gets like, he plays like these mobsters and becomes this like super villain almost, this guy that everyone fears. And I feel like it kind of came from True Romance. I feel like watching him do that, like the coldness in his ability to do it, explaining about how his first kill went, how he was nervous, he almost threw up, or he did throw up, and then how it gets easier and easier. That sounds like somebody who would work for the mob, right? So I think that that's what got him the job in The Sopranos. Now, don't quote me on that. That's just speculation, but that's what I was thinking. Are you looking forward to the RoboCop video game? Wrote Kevin L. 110% I am. I'm hoping they don't screw it up. Like, they do a lot of like licensed games, but I think it's in good hands from what we've seen so far. It looks good. The Wolverine video game, I'm very excited about it. I wish I had a PS5 to play it though, but yeah, I'm excited that we're getting that. I just hope that it's as fun as it could be. Like, doesn't that make the most sense to be a video game? RoboCop, like of any of the characters, like how many movies and like how many video games kind of almost are similar to RoboCop without actually being RoboCop, but stealing certain themes from the movie? So as long as they adapt it well, I think we're in good hands. Shamrock Balls Road. David Chase wanted Stevie Van Zant for for Tony Soprano. I know. I've heard those stories too. I cannot believe that. I mean, it makes sense. And of course, he ends up playing a different role on the show. But I can't believe that that was the first thought. And then also, I remember reading that another one of the lead actors who was almost had the role of Tony Soprano was the guy who was originally in charge of he was the original guy head of the mob. He ends up dying of cancer, I think, in like the third or fourth episode. And then his son is also on there. I can't remember what the actor's name was, but he was in the running as one of the final choices too. And then they ended up deciding on James Gandolfini. So that's one thing about being an actor I could never handle. I think is like the nerves of that, like getting down to like the final three after going through all of these, I'm sure, crazy like test screenings and everything like that, and then eventually you end up losing. Like I couldn't handle that. Like going through all that work and to eventually, I would rather know up front that it wasn't going to work out. Uh, Shamrock Ball's right. Yeah, that's right. Jackie Appeal. Yeah, April. Yeah, and then Jackie Appeal Jr., that piece of crap. He not a chip off the old block. And although his death on the show, well, spoiler alert, I guess, ended up being pretty shocking. But yeah, Jackie Aprile, that guy, that actor was supposed to originally, it was him and Tony Soprano, and like you said, Stevie Van Zant as the final like three that they wanted to be Tony Soprano. So that was, I can't see anybody else but James Gandolfini being Tony Soprano, but that's just my personal opinion. I think he was born to play that role. Every time I would see him after that, even if I'm going back, it's like that's Tony Soprano. So I mean, not many people get that in life, that iconic role, but I also understand being like that stereotyped or being shoehorned into always those type of roles that you want to try out the things. Shamrock Ball sure wasn't John Travolta. Kinkle the stage, Kinkle in the stage version of Grease. No, it was not. John Travolta. I love the Soprano. Shamrock Balls Road. Yeah. So actually, I didn't know that. Speaking of John Travolta in Grease, I didn't know that John Travolta actually in the stage version played that character. And then when they started the movie, he was only supposed to have one song. He ended up taking two songs for himself, I guess, because he's John Travolta and he's the star, and he grown up Carter and everything. So he was really on the rise. He knew his star power at the time, but kind of used it and screwed over some other people in the movie Grease, maybe unintentionally. I guess he just kind of had that view of like what the kind of person he was at the time, because obviously he would fall from grace by the time we get to the end of the 80s. He was just doing Look Who's Talking. And I always thought that Quentin Tarantino wrote the role of Vincent Vega for John Travolta, whereas actually he did, but that was also the only role that was ever offered to John Travolta at the time. He had nothing else. He said he had to take it, which I couldn't believe that. Even so, you would think that John Travolta would still have that pull necessary to get any kind of role he wanted, just because of all the good credit he built up in the early 80s, not just with Grease, but I mean Blowout. He was acting in everything and he was pretty damn good at the time. Yeah, he whiffed on a few choices, but overall he was the guy. Like, I mean, nobody could do what John Travolta could do. He was handsome, he could sing, he could dance, he was charming, he was funny, but He made some poor choices as far as films go in like the mid to late '80s, and then I guess that kind of derailed his career there for a bit. But he got back on track. Then he got to make movies like Broken Arrow and Michael, which I'm sure we're all thankful for. Although Broken Arrow's not that bad, so don't quote me on that one. What time is it? So anyway, guys, let's see what else is going on in here. Didn't the studio say anyone but Travolta that laugh out loud they wanted Sean Penn? Yeah, they hated John Travolta. It's crazy how many people felt about John Travolta at the time. Yeah, I guess it's just the kind of person he was. Have you seen the movie Perfect? Maybe. I'm not sure. Let me see when that movie came out, and I can tell you if I saw it. Perfect. I don't. It's not ringing a bell. Perfect. Okay, 1995. Oh wow. I definitely haven't seen this movie. It came out around the same time though as he did a movie called Phenomena, which was for Phenomenon, which was really good as well with Forrest Whitaker, which that one kind of got lost in the shuffle. It's a good feel good movie. Kind of John Travolta ends up developing like a Sixth Sense or a Seventh Sense kind of deal. And that movie ends up being pretty good as well. He does a good job in that. It's emotional, has a sad ending, but I think it's definitely one of those mid '90s melodramas that's not too bad. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Contact, not in plot or story wise, just in tone wise. So I actually really do like that movie as well. But I'm gonna check this movie out. I didn't even know he made this movie, or at least I don't remember it. Jamie Lee Curtis too. Hmm. That's only 1 year after she did True Lies, so that was like her career resurgence in a way. But anyway, guys, I'm actually gonna get out of here now because I gotta go pick up Faith from work. I hope you guys enjoyed the live stream. If you got any recommendations for next week, we can always do this again. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll do it all over again. I love doing these with you guys, and I appreciate you all being here. So I'll see you guys all around. Let me know for next week. I hope you guys enjoy the shows this week. And yeah, enjoy your day, boys. Cheers, buddy. Cheers to you too, Shamrock. I'll see you, man. And thanks to everyone else who was in here as well all day. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Later.